still has a very powerful effect on me and every other member of the crew. It really just has affected our lives ever since in profound ways. There's just, it's impossible to even know what life would have been like had it never happened, because everything was changed forever. Started out just a normal work day. 7 of us. In the movie there was only 5, but there were 7 of us out there. And we were just headed home from work. We'd worked up almost dark, and hadn't gone very far. In the movie it gives the impression we'd been driving long enough to get drowsy, but we hadn't gone very far at all when all this glimmer coming through the trees. Everybody didn't see it at once, but little by little it figured out this was something definitely out of the ordinary. At first it wasn't all that alarming, because it was just some little bits of light coming through the trees, but I thought at first that maybe some deer hunters had camped up there on the ridge. We're paralleling the back of this ridge, headed south up towards the rim road, and I figured out pretty quick that the light was coming from higher than where ground level would be. The trees were so thick we couldn't really see, the source of the light. It's not like everybody called attention to it immediately, but everybody, we figured out later, was looking at it and trying to figure out what it was, thinking maybe a plane crash, maybe, the Mogollon Rim there in Arizona has got the highest number of lightning strikes of any place in the continental United States outside of the Everglades. So it wasn't that unusual. We'd actually stopped and put out a fire before that, where lightning had struck the tree the night before in the storm, and we saw it on fire. We stopped and put out the fire. So, we'd all fought fire before. When they had a forest fire, they'd come and get the crew and have us go fight fire. But so all this stuff wasn't adding up. There had been no storm the night before, and I could see there was a break in the trees ahead where the light was shining across the road ahead. And I said, "Mike, hurry up, get up there where we can see what it is." And when we got up there to where this light, there was a clearing there, and as soon as it came into view, there it was, just clearly defined against the sky. It was below treetop level, but less than 100 feet away. It was so close that you could have hit it with a rock from the truck. And this is in response to our famous UFO skeptic there, who first offered the theory that we'd seen the planet Jupiter. But this is not some little ball of light off in the sky. It was unmistakable, clearly defined, metallic. It was smooth as glass, and giving off light and shiny at the same time. So, it's kind of like when you see the television screen and there's the light from the windows being reflected off of the screen, which is giving off light and reflecting at the same time. So you could see the trees reflected in the surface at the same time. It was giving off this strange glow that made everything look really strange. As soon as Mike stopped the truck, I threw open the truck door and started towards it, because I thought it was just going to leave immediately. Very often when we spot a wild animal on the way to work or something, you call the attention of the rest of the crew to it, and it'd be gone before they could even look. So that was kind of my thinking. And I got out and headed towards it. I was moving pretty fast at first, and then I started having second thoughts about what I was doing, and the crew was getting pretty alarmed about that and started yelling at me and to get back in the truck, swearing and getting pretty anxious. But the closer I got, the more I could feel this, not just hear, but feel the sound that it was making. And Mike said he could feel the vibration in the truck. And they said it felt like something was about to happen. And I think that had more to do with just the idea that I was getting close to it, and that was a dangerous thing to do. I think what happened was that it was building up energy, building up power to leave, because there was like a charge in the air. Kind of the, you know, you think the hair on the back of your neck's rising because of fear, but, you know, the idea that it was an electrical charge has to do with what happened next. As I was looking up at it, the sound was off the range of human hearing on the high end and the low end. A whole mixture of tones that it's impossible to describe. Just, you know, I could spend 5 minutes just describing the sound and trying to compare it to something. But it suddenly got louder and started to move. And so I just instinctively jumped for cover. And by then the crew was really, you know, in a frenzy, screaming and swearing at me to get out of there. And I didn't need to be encouraged to get out of there. I was feeling I was in a pretty dangerous situation. But when I jumped for cover, it was down and forward to get behind this log. So when I stood up to run back to the truck, wham, that's when it hit me. And I think what happened is that by standing up that much closer to it, I brought my body to a point where it was the closest thing to the craft. And then the energy just jumped from there through me to the ground. And this is, you know, this is after having 30 years to think about it. You know, we took it to be some kind of a weapon or some kind of a defense mechanism or something that might have been used deliberately against me. But I'm thinking more now that it had to do with the fact that I unexpectedly got too close and it discharged this energy. But in the movie, it makes it look like like a spotlight comes on and just tosses the actor back. But it was much more violent than that. And the reason I'm emphasizing that is, you know, Hollywood's got this tendency that anytime they can make a real light show, they're going to really exaggerate things, but they played it down instead. But that's why the crew was immediately certain that it had killed me. It was so violent. That's why they compared it to a grenade or stepping on a landmine or something. Because it threw me through the air, and the way my body tumbled and hit the ground like a rag doll, they started screaming at each other. They said, he's dead, it killed him. And so they took off, driving just crazy with fear, and dang near wrecked the truck, smashing into trees and whatnot. They said they got up there a ways, and they were arguing about what to do, and Dwayne Smith said that he thought, he's the tallest guy in the back there, and he said, it looked like it disintegrated, like it, you know, he was blown to pieces. And he said, no, I kept my eyes on him the whole time, and I saw him hit the ground, and he was in one piece. But that's you know, the violence of this, the energy ball with, you know, my arms and legs flying through the air, is why they should not be blamed for taking off like that. This was not a cowardly thing to do at all. Mike was the crew boss. He was responsible for the safety of the rest of the crew, and he did the only sensible thing. When they started screaming, "Get us out of here!" You know, he just instinctively got everybody to safety. But they said by the time they stopped the first time, you know, that they had, you know, suddenly burst into this screaming match about what to do and what they just seen and everything. Suddenly that was interrupted by some hunters going by on the connecting road out there on the rim road. So they jumped in the truck and took off and tried to catch him, thinking that they'd get somebody with some guns to go back with him. But they weren't able to catch up with him. So in the movie, when Mike pulls off the road and says, look, you know, we got to go back, and they didn't want to go, that happened. But when he said, anybody who doesn't want to go with us can, you know, wait here for us, and we'll go back and we'll get you on our way back. Nobody volunteered to get out of the truck. They all stayed in the truck, and they all went back. And you got to give them credit for that, because, you know, their only motive in going back was to see if they could rescue me. And so that took a lot of guts. And anybody that think, you know, I've had people actually, you know, say this, you know, and with some of those guys talking with me, that they thought that was cowardly, and it wasn't. It was just, you know, the instinctive thing that anybody would have done. You know, I'm sure had I been in the driver's seat or one of the other guys, I would have said, get us out of here. So they all went back, and as they approached the area, they saw this light move up through the trees and off towards the northeast. So that helped some, but you know, Kenny said later that, you know, the thing that was terrifying him the most was not seeing the craft again, but he was afraid of what my body was going to look like. He expected he'd find me there all charred or something. And so when they got back to where they could see the tracks in the road where the truck had spun out and dug holes and, you know, thrown rocks when they took off. So they knew they were in the right spot. And they all got out. They said they only had one flashlight, and they were all huddled around that one flashlight. And Steve said that, you know, he was doing his best to be sure he was in the middle of the group the whole way. But as they moved through the trees searching, they'd occasionally catch a glimpse of the moon, and it was kind of this pale golden glow that was similar to the light the craft gave off. So they'd be startled by that. But at one point, Mike broke down and started crying, fell to his knees, and you know, he's the leader of the group. But the next oldest guy, Ken, you know, helped him to his feet, and Mike pulled himself together, and they decided to go back to town and get some help. And on the way, they argued about what to do. Alan Dallas, he was kind of the black sheep of the crew. He's played by Craig Sheffer, by the way, who's here in the Walk of Fame out here, promoting his latest movie. He played Alan Dallas, but Alan Dallas was the black sheep, and he didn't want nothing to do with the police. He was just saying, look, let's just go get some friends with guns, and then we'll come and make a search. And then if we can't find Travis, then we'll report it to the authorities. But Kenny and Mike said no, you know, and I think John too was saying, you know, we got to stay on the up and up all the way through this. If Travis is never found, if we don't, you know, report this right away, you know, that's going to make us look real suspicious. So they went and they called the local deputy, and they were afraid to, you know, talk about the UFO right then, because they were afraid they'd just think it was a crank call and blow it off and not even come. So they said, we got a missing person, he might be hurt or whatever. So the deputy came down, and then they told him what had happened, and so he called the sheriff, and who was 30 miles away in Holbrook, and him and his undersheriff came down and interviewed them, and they met at this gas station, you know, which is abandoned now, and it's a picture of it there on the main street through Heber, Arizona. But the sheriff and his men were immediately impressed with something terrible had happened. They had no doubt about that. You know, some of the guys were still crying and shaking, and you know, just totally authentic fear if you ever saw it. The sheriff looked around to see if there was any beer cans in the back of the truck or anything like that, but they were immediately, we found out later, suspicious that maybe there had been some kind of a fight, and that maybe I'd been killed, and they were making up this story to cover it up for some reason. So, unlike in the movie, they did go back that night. The sheriff and his men took half the crew back. The other half went on into town. They made a search that night. And then the next day, this massive manhunt was undertaken, which grew day by day and wound up including aircraft. But they had men on horseback, men on foot, you know, 50, 60 men spread out over the whole country, crisscrossing. The horses that some of the men were riding were behaving erratically, and one of them bolted and couldn't even be found. And the tracking dogs were able to track me from the road to the middle of the clearing, and that was it. So the men who were involved in the search said that the sheriff put a deputy with each of them, and the whole day stayed right with them, pushing them to try to get them to fess up to murder. Just tell us where the body's hidden, and we can, you know, all go home and forget this space nonsense. But at one point, Dwayne Smith was back at the clearing, and this Forest Service volunteer came up and grabbed Dwayne by the front of the shirt and jerked him up close and said, "All right, where'd you hide the body?" And my brother, who was there, was also named Dwayne, said, "Hey, knock it off, and you got better things to do." So he kind of broke that up, but the men, started saying, "Look, we'll take any test you want. Give us sodium pentothal, give us a lie detector test, whatever." So the sheriff took him up on that and arranged for the state police polygraph examiner to come in, the best in the state, maybe the best in the nation at the time, but years of experience in state police polygraph work, testing people, on trial for murder. And the sheriff fully expected to get a report that a murder had been committed, but when the men passed, he was really stunned. He was just stunned. The polygraph examiner described the look on his face. Didn't say anything for a bit, but then it was just one thing after another. There was an incredible amount of pressure on the men this whole time, about murder, and then all kinds of accusations and mockery. It's got to be the easiest thing in the world to make jokes about. And some of them are actually funny. I could talk a little bit about that now that all that's passed, but it was really, really hard back at the time. After I was hit by that beam, I blacked out. Boom, it was so powerful. One of the deputies that wrote a report that was in the sheriff's file that said it was described as looking like a long blue flame, and others described it as like a blue laser blast or a bluish green bolt of lightning. But however they described it, they said it was the brightest thing that lit up the woods as far as you could see, brighter than daylight. And so, what I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. It felt kind of like an electric shock, but it was a very stunning sort of feeling, a numbing shock sort of feeling that, so I didn't see anything more. I don't know how I was taken aboard or anything, but when I came to, it was kind of in and out for a while, and I didn't come fully conscious. My vision was all blurry and double vision, and at first I didn't even remember anything that happened, and then I remembered coming up to that object, and I figured I must have been hurt, that they'd taken me to the hospital. So I thought I was in a hospital because I was on this raised surface, like a gurney or an operating table, and there was a light above me, and the ceiling was so close. I couldn't really move well enough to look around, and it hurt to move at all. And they had this thing across my chest, and I was afraid I might be, making it worse or by moving. So I held still, and I worked on trying to regain consciousness, but I felt this suffocating feeling like I just couldn't get enough air, pain in my head and chest, and that was pretty terrifying, wondering what was wrong with me. What's wrong with me, Am I dying or something? And I could hear the sounds of movement around me, and although I couldn't focus very clearly, I thought that I was looking at doctors, with the surgical cap and mask on, with a little gap in between the hat and the mask, this dark area. But when I could finally focus, I was looking right into the face of this creature. It was just right there, a foot from my face, and it was just such a shock that it gave me a shot of adrenaline that gave me the strength to finally move. And I lashed out. Well, I thought was lashing out. I could barely move my arm, and I pushed the one that was closest to me away, and he fell back into the other one. He was a lot softer and lighter than I expected, but I rolled away from him, and that thing they had on me fell off, and they came around the table coming towards me, and they never took their eyes off me. But I stumbled back until I bumped into this shelf behind me, kind of a workbench about as high as this table here, and there was a row of instruments laid out there. But it was just a quick glance, and I just grabbed the biggest thing I could find and started flailing at him and screaming,